Few men have embodied the spirit of the American West like Randolph Scott. With his quiet strength and commanding presence, he became the face of the rugged, heroic cowboy. For decades, his performances were the definition of stoic masculinity. But behind the iconic image, there was more to Scott than anyone knew. A secret, hidden away for years, would only come to light after his death, changing how the world saw him. The note he left behind, though brief, offered an intimate glimpse into the man who had always kept his true self guarded. In it, he revealed a story of loneliness, longing, and emotional conflict, things that had never been visible on screen. What had always appeared to be simplicity was, in fact, a life full of complexity. This is the untold story of Randolph Scott. Randolph Scott's story begins on January 23, 1898, in the quiet countryside of Orange County, Virginia. Born to a family of prominence, Scott's early years were shaped by privilege and opportunity. He grew up in the genteel surroundings of Charlotte, North Carolina, in a home where status and education were highly valued. His father, George Grant Scott, was a certified public accountant, a profession that provided the family with stability and a respectable place within their community. His mother, Lucille Crane Scott, was the heart of their home, guiding Randolph and his siblings with a firm yet loving hand. In a family where success was expected, Randolph was raised with the kind of discipline that would later define his public persona. His family's connections offered him a world of possibilities, and it was clear from an early age that he was a bright and ambitious young man. But despite this privileged start, he would eventually seek something more, something beyond the confines of a comfortable life in the South. Educated at private schools, Randolph excelled in his studies, earning respect for his intellect as well as his athleticism. It was during these formative years that he first considered a future in engineering, enrolling at the Georgia Institute of Technology to study the field. But fate would intervene, as World War I soon disrupted his plans. As a young man of great promise, he felt the call to serve his country, and he enlisted in the U.S. Army. In 1917, Scott found himself stationed in France, part of the 2nd Trench Mortar Battalion. Though he was fortunate enough to avoid heavy combat, his time in the Army left a profound mark on him. The discipline and camaraderie he experienced on the battlefield shaped the man he would become. It was in the trenches, far from home, that Randolph Scott's sense of honor, duty, and stoicism began to take root, traits that would later define his legendary career. The rigors of military service imbued him with a quiet strength and resilience, qualities that would become the cornerstone of his on-screen persona. His military service, though brief in the grand scheme of things, would set the stage for the ideals he would come to embody: loyalty, perseverance, and an unwavering sense of duty. When the war ended, Randolph returned to North Carolina with a new perspective on life. He was no longer simply a young man seeking education. He was now a man who understood the weight of responsibility and sacrifice. But despite his time in the military, he still felt the pull of something greater: the allure of Hollywood, where the world of possibility seemed endless, and the chance to carve out a name for himself in the entertainment world was too strong to resist. After returning from the war, Randolph Scott found himself feeling restless, yearning for something more than the familiar surroundings of North Carolina. The stability of his upbringing and the lessons of duty and honor he'd learned during his time in the military had forged a strong, disciplined man. But he felt a deeper calling, a need to pursue something different, something that would challenge him and offer a chance to make a mark on the world. Encouraged by his father, who saw the potential in his son's ambitions, Scott made the life-altering decision to leave the South and head to Hollywood. the emerging capital of the entertainment industry. Hollywood in the 1920s was a land of opportunity, but also one of fierce competition. As a newcomer, Scott had to start at the bottom. The city, known for its glitz and glamour, was still in the midst of its transition from silent films to the world of sound, and many aspiring actors struggled to break through the noise. Scott's early years in the industry were far from glamorous. He worked as an extra, playing uncredited roles in a range of films, most of which were small, almost invisible parts. Yet even in these brief appearances, it was clear to anyone who watched that Scott had a natural presence. Standing tall at 6 feet 2 inches, with a strong, athletic build, he caught the eye of casting directors. His striking appearance and physicality made him a natural for roles in action films, particularly westerns, where the need for a commanding figure was paramount. Though the roles were minor, Scott's looks, poise, and ability to move with grace and strength earned him steady work, providing the foundation for what would eventually become a remarkable career. It was during these years of struggle that Randolph Scott's fate would change when he crossed paths with one of Hollywood's most influential directors, Cecil B. DeMille. DeMille was known for his grand, sweeping films and his knack for recognizing the raw talent in young actors. He saw something in Scott, something that set him apart from the crowd. Impressed by Scott's demeanor and his ability to embody the strong, silent type of character that fit perfectly within the world DeMille often created, the director cast him in several roles in the early sound films of the late 1920s and early 1930s. It was these roles that began to set the stage for Scott's rise. DeMille helped Scott land significant roles, where he was able to display his capabilities in larger, more important parts. Scott's transition from bit parts to featured roles in sound films was a crucial turning point in his career. He went from being a background player to an actor with a real presence on screen. His early appearances in films like The Virginia in 1929, where he played a part in a dramatic story set during the American Civil War, allowed Scott to showcase his developing talents. The breakthrough for Scott came in 1934 with his role in The Last Roundup. This film marked a pivotal moment for the young actor, as it highlighted his rugged good looks and natural ability to portray a man of action. His performance in The Last Roundup was well received, and it opened doors for him to appear in more westerns, the genre where he would soon become a household name. As the western genre surged in popularity throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Scott found himself typecast, but he embraced it, knowing that his physicality and temperament were perfectly suited for the roles. Despite the early struggles, Scott's perseverance and dedication paid off. His performances in these early films established him as a rising star in Hollywood, particularly within the Western genre. His ability to play the strong, stoic hero, men of principle facing adversity with silent determination, became his trademark. By the mid-1930s, Scott was firmly on his way to becoming one of the most beloved and recognizable faces in the world of film. His rugged charm and quiet strength resonated with audiences, and his reputation as the quintessential cowboy hero began to take shape. What began as a humble start in the world of Hollywood extras had blossomed into a promising career, thanks to his undeniable presence and his chance meeting with one of the most influential directors in the industry. As the 1930s wore on, Scott's performances began to shine in a steady stream of successful films, establishing him as a trusted leading man. His journey from anonymity to stardom was well underway, and it was clear that Randolph Scott was on the verge of something great. As Hollywood entered the 1930s, the Western genre was beginning to rise in prominence, driven by a growing audience's desire for adventure, heroism, and the untamed landscapes of the American frontier. Westerns offered a form of escapism, a way to engage with stories of grit, ruggedness, and morality. But not all actors could embody the spirit of the West. For Randolph Scott, however, it was the perfect fit. With his tall frame, rugged good looks, and quiet strength, he seemed born to play the cowboy, the lone figure standing tall against the wild unknown. In an era where the American West was being mythologized through film, Scott's physicality became one of his greatest assets. He carried himself with a calm confidence and a presence that demanded attention, even when he wasn't speaking. His demeanor was exactly what filmmakers were looking for in a leading man. He had the stature, the rugged charm, and the internal strength needed to bring a believable cowboy to life. Where other actors might rely on flashy gestures or dramatic speeches, Scott's strength was in his ability to say little but communicate everything through his posture, his expressions, and his actions. His performance was rooted in stoic silence, a perfect match for the archetype of the Western hero. The 1930s and 1940s saw a major shift in Hollywood's cinematic landscape. As the country slowly pulled itself out of the Great Depression, Westerns surged in popularity, and audiences flocked to the theaters for films that embodied the ideals of the frontier: self-reliance, honor, and justice. Amid this cultural shift, Scott emerged as one of the stars who defined the genre. His films captured the imagination of millions, and he quickly became one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. By the end of the 1930s, Scott was no longer just a rising star. He was an icon of the Western genre. One of Scott's defining roles came in 1936, with his performance in Last of the Mohicans. This film, based on James Fenimore Cooper's novel, was a monumental success, and Scott's portrayal of the steadfast and determined Natty Bumppo solidified his status as a leading man. His ability to portray a character of integrity and bravery, standing firm against the threats of both nature and man, made him an ideal fit for the role of the frontier hero. Scott's portrayal wasn't just about action. There was a quiet depth in his character, a man who, despite the violence surrounding him, adhered to a personal code of honor. The success of Last of the Mohicans propelled Scott into even greater recognition, and by 1939, he was starring in Jesse James, another iconic film that would further solidify his place among the Western greats. In Jesse James, Scott played the famous outlaw, a role that allowed him to expand his range beyond the pure heroic figures he had portrayed before. As Jesse James, Scott's character was far more complex, both a criminal and a symbol of resistance, torn between his desire for justice and his willingness to resort to violence. This film marked a significant step in Scott's ability to portray morally ambiguous characters, a theme that would become a hallmark of his career. As the 1940s progressed, Scott's popularity continued to grow with films like Western Union, 1941. This film, which told the story of the establishment of the first telegraph line in the West, showcased Scott's ability to play the dependable, no-nonsense hero. He was the kind of man who could be relied upon in a crisis, whose quiet strength could be counted on to see the day through. His performance in Western Union exemplified the character archetype he had come to perfect: a strong, dependable man of few words, driven by an unwavering sense of honor and duty. But what made Scott stand out from other Western stars was the way he infused his characters with complexity. Unlike the larger-than-life, often exaggerated heroes of the genre, Scott's cowboys were men of substance. His characters weren't just gunslingers or frontier lawmen. They were men struggling with their own moral dilemmas. Scott's heroes were often men torn between right and wrong, forced to make difficult choices in a world where clear answers didn't always exist. This depth of character was something that set him apart from other stars of the era. and it allowed him to bring a sense of realism and relatability to the Western genre. Scott's heroes were quiet, reserved, and often emotionally restrained, but this stoicism gave them an air of mystery and gravitas that made them compelling to watch. While other stars of the time might have relied on big speeches or flashy displays of emotion, Scott's strength came from his ability to embody the unspoken. His characters' actions spoke louder than words, and their internal struggles often resonated more than any dramatic dialogue ever could. This complexity and subtlety was apparent in films like Jesse James and Western Union, where Scott's characters grappled with the consequences of their choices. These were not one-dimensional heroes, but men who wrestled with the harsh realities of the world they inhabited. In the hands of Scott, these roles were never just about riding into town, defeating the bad guys, and riding off into the sunset. They were about men struggling to live according to their own moral compass, even when the world around them was unforgiving. As the 1940s came to a close, Scott had become a permanent fixture in the Western genre, known for his ability to portray the strong, silent hero with a quiet, moral code. He had established himself not just as a movie star, but as the embodiment of the American frontier spirit, defined by self-reliance, integrity, and strength of character. The westerns he starred in became the standard by which all others would be measured, and he earned his place as one of the genre's most beloved and enduring figures. Through his roles in films like Last of the Mohicans, Jesse James, and Western Union, Scott became more than just an actor. He became the personification of the Western hero. His characters might have said little, but through every film, Randolph Scott spoke volumes about the values of the American frontier: courage, honor, and the quiet, enduring strength of a man who faced the challenges of life with unflinching determination. And it was this portrayal that would continue to resonate with audiences for decades to come. As the 1950s dawned, the Western genre was evolving, and so was Randolph Scott. By this time, Scott had already established himself as one of the genre's most iconic figures, but a new phase in his career was about to unfold. It was in this decade that Scott formed a key partnership with director Bud Boetticher, a collaboration that would redefine both of their careers and produce some of the finest Western films ever made. Bud Boetticher's vision and approach to storytelling were a perfect match for Scott's unique style. Together, they embarked on a series of films that would later be known as the Ranown cycle, named after the production company they formed with producer Harry Joe Brown. This group of films, made between 1956 and 1959, marked the peak of Scott's career, representing a turn toward deeper, more complex characters and stories. Films like 7 Men from Now, 1956, The Tall T, 1957, and Ride Lonesome, 1959, would go on to be regarded as masterpieces of Western cinema, influencing generations of filmmakers and actors. In 7 Men from Now, Scott portrayed a man driven by vengeance and a need for redemption, a theme that would become central to many of his later roles. The film's taut, minimalist storytelling and its focus on a protagonist haunted by his past were a departure from the more conventional westerns of the time. Scott's portrayal of the emotionally conflicted character was raw and deeply affecting, showing a side of him that was both vulnerable and resolute. This film set the tone for the others in the Ranown cycle, each exploring similar themes of personal loss, revenge, and the quest for redemption. The Tall T followed in 1957, and once again, Scott's character was a man of few words, but one whose quiet dignity and strength spoke volumes. In this film, Scott's role as a rancher caught in a dangerous situation highlighted his ability to embody the Western hero in a more mature light. By now, Scott was no longer the young, fresh-faced cowboy, of his earlier films. He was playing men who had seen the harsh realities of life and carried the weight of those experiences. The complexities of his character, tough yet compassionate, strong but haunted, brought a layer of depth to the genre that was rarely seen before. In Ride Lonesome, 1959, Scott's portrayal of a bounty hunter seeking justice was another masterclass in understated acting. The film explored themes of isolation and personal responsibility, with Scott's character navigating a morally ambiguous world. The film's stark, minimalist style emphasized the emotional weight carried by Scott's character, and his performance stood as a testament to his ability to convey internal conflict without resorting to overt melodrama. These films, often sparse in dialogue and heavy on atmosphere, allowed Scott to shine in a way that felt natural, as if he was truly inhabiting the character rather than performing it. Through the Ranown cycle, Scott's characters grew more mature, world-weary, and reflective. Gone were the confident, unshakable heroes of his earlier westerns. In their place were men who had lived through hardships, whose pasts had left deep scars. These were characters struggling with the choices they had made, sometimes seeking redemption, other times simply trying to survive in a world that seemed to offer little mercy. The themes of revenge and justice, so central to the Western genre, were explored in a much more nuanced way in these films, and Scott's performances became even more compelling as a result. The Ranown cycle not only reshaped Scott's career, but also had a profound impact on Western cinema. These films broke from the formulaic structure of many Westerns of the time, offering instead tight, character-driven narratives that focused on the emotional journeys of their protagonists. The stark, minimalist style of Boetticher's direction complemented Scott's restrained performances perfectly, creating a unique atmosphere that would go on to influence directors such as Sergio Leone and Clint Eastwood, both of whom would help redefine the Western in the 1960s and beyond. Moreover, the films of the Ranown cycle demonstrated a shift in the portrayal of the Western hero. No longer were they invincible, larger-than-life figures. They were flawed men, often carrying personal burdens that shaped their decisions and actions. In this sense, Scott's roles in these films were ahead of their time, presaging the more complex and morally ambiguous characters that would become a hallmark of modern cinema. These films, though often overlooked at the time of their release, have since been hailed as some of the best examples of the genre, and their influence can be seen in countless Westerns that followed. Scott's performances in these films helped to elevate the Western genre to new artistic heights, showcasing the emotional depth that could be found within these otherwise rugged tales of the frontier. His ability to portray the inner struggles of his characters, men searching for redemption, justice, or simply peace, made them feel real and relatable. They were not just archetypal cowboys, but men with histories, regrets, and unresolved conflicts. By the end of the 1950s, Randolph Scott had firmly cemented his legacy as one of the greatest actors in the history of the Western genre. His collaboration with Bud Boetticher and their work on the Ranown cycle ensured that Scott's name would be forever associated with some of the finest Western films ever made. Through these films, Scott proved that the Western could be more than just action and adventure. It could be a platform for exploring deep emotional themes, complex characters, and the human condition. Scott's work in these films not only redefined his career, but also left a lasting mark on the genre he helped shape. Randolph Scott's personal life, much like his on-screen persona, was defined by a quiet, reserved nature. Despite his growing fame as one of Hollywood's most iconic Western stars, Scott was a man who valued his privacy above all else. While many of his contemporaries were constantly in the public eye, courting the press and embracing the glamour of Hollywood, Scott chose a different path. a life away from the constant buzz of fame, where he could focus on the things that truly mattered to him: his family, his faith, and his personal values. Scott's first marriage, to Marion DuPont in 1936, was brief, lasting only until 1939. Marion was the daughter of wealthy industrialist William DuPont, and the marriage initially seemed to promise a life of high society and Hollywood glamour. But it was clear early on that their paths diverged, and the couple parted ways after just 3 years. It was a time in Scott's life where he was still figuring out who he was, both as an actor and as a man. Their divorce, though amicable, would become one of the few public aspects of his personal life, as Scott generally kept his relationships private. In 1944, Scott married again, this time to Pat Stillman. Their union would last until his death in 1987, a rare example of a Hollywood marriage that endured through the years. Pat Stillman was a woman who shared his values, and together they created a stable and private life away from the prying eyes of the media. Scott's marriage to Pat was the cornerstone of his personal happiness. They adopted 2 children, Sandra and Christopher, who grew up in a household that, despite the fame surrounding their father, remained relatively sheltered from the public's gaze. Scott's preference for privacy was a stark contrast to many other stars of his era. At a time when Hollywood was overflowing with scandals, divorces, and tabloid headlines, Scott remained an enigma, rarely seen in the company of others, and avoiding the social scene that many of his peers thrived in. While actors like Errol Flynn and Cary Grant reveled in their public personas, Scott was more concerned with living a life that was true to his values. His choice to maintain a low profile was not just an effort to escape the limelight, but a reflection of his deeper commitment to his family and the life they shared. This focus on family, coupled with his deeply held Christian faith, was at the heart of Scott's personal life. Throughout his career, he remained committed to the principles of honor, integrity, and respect, values he had learned growing up in the South and which guided him throughout his life. Scott was known to be devout in his faith, and it was said that he often sought solace in prayer. His church was an important part of his life, and he was involved in various charitable endeavors that aligned with his Christian beliefs. Unlike many Hollywood stars who saw their careers as a means of achieving wealth and recognition, Scott's motivations were far more grounded. He saw his work as a way to provide for his family and live a life that aligned with his values, rather than one that catered to the public's ever-changing whims. He was known to avoid the trappings of fame, preferring instead the peace and quiet of his home and the companionship of his loved ones. His children, Sandra and Christopher, grew up in a home where love, faith, and respect were the foundations, and where the celebrity status of their father was never allowed to overshadow the more important aspects of life. While Scott was widely adored for his on-screen presence and his performances, few knew the depth of his commitment to his faith and his family. He was not a man driven by the need for validation from the public, nor did he seek fame for its own sake. Instead, his sense of duty and honor extended beyond his career and into his personal life. He believed in living with integrity, treating others with kindness, and finding fulfillment in the simple joys of life. This devotion to his faith and family was something that never wavered throughout his life. While the pressures of fame could be overwhelming, Scott's ability to keep his personal life intact is one of the qualities that made him stand out in an industry known for its volatility. His ability to remain grounded despite the heights of success set him apart from many of his contemporaries who found themselves caught up in the excesses of Hollywood life. Randolph Scott's decision to remain private and keep his focus on his family and his beliefs is a testament to the man he truly was. In an industry where stars often became larger than life, he never sought the attention of the tabloids or the spotlight outside of his work. He simply wanted to be the best husband, father, and man of faith he could be. Values that, when viewed alongside his legacy in Western films, reveal a man of true strength and character. As the years passed and Scott grew older, his retreat from the public eye only deepened. He became a man who valued the quieter moments of life, finding peace in his family and his community. After retiring from acting in 1962, Scott's life became even more centered around his faith, family, and the simple pleasures that had always been most important to him. His involvement in charity work and his participation in charity golf events reflected a man who lived with a deep sense of purpose, one that transcended the world of film. Through it all, Scott's devotion to his family and his faith remained unshaken, and these aspects of his life are what truly defined him as a person. While his films remain a testament to his incredible talent, it is the quiet strength he displayed off-screen, his commitment to his loved ones and his faith, that offers a more complete understanding of the man behind the iconic cowboy roles. Randolph Scott's personal life, particularly his long and close friendship with fellow actor Cary Grant, has been a subject of fascination and speculation for decades. The two men shared not only a professional relationship, but also an enduring personal bond that went far beyond the typical Hollywood camaraderie. They lived together for several years in a beachfront home in Malibu, a detail that sparked endless rumors and questions from the press and the public. In an era when the Hollywood elite's private lives were as closely scrutinized as their on-screen performances, any relationship between two male stars living together naturally invited speculation. For years, whispers swirled around their relationship, some asking if it was more than just a friendship, others wondering if their connection hinted at something deeper. The press, always hungry for stories, picked up on the unusual living arrangements and the bond the two men shared, often creating stories that veered into the realm of speculation. The secrecy that surrounded Scott and Grant only fueled these rumors. At a time when the entertainment industry demanded conformity and adherence to socially acceptable norms, any deviation, especially concerning matters of sexuality, was considered taboo and could spell the end of a career. Hollywood, in its golden age, was a place where stars were expected to maintain meticulously curated public images. Behind the glitzy red carpets and glamorous film sets, the reality of living under constant scrutiny was far more complicated. The intense pressure to conform to societal expectations, particularly regarding sexuality, made it nearly impossible for stars to live authentically. Both Scott and Grant, despite their undeniable chemistry and closeness, had to navigate the ever-watchful eyes of the media, ensuring that their private lives remained hidden in order to protect their careers. The idea of a romantic relationship between two men was not just scandalous, it could destroy their carefully constructed public images. In a time when Hollywood's leading men were expected to epitomize virility, any deviation from the heterosexual norm could result in scandal, job loss, and public disgrace. Many of the most famous stars of the era, including both Scott and Grant, faced immense pressure to maintain the facade of traditional masculinity, as it was the only path to continued success. Both men, regardless of their true feelings or desires, adhered to this unwritten rule, largely remaining silent about the nature of their relationship. For the sake of their careers, they played the game, presenting themselves as the quintessential straight men, while simultaneously living lives that diverged from the public persona. While neither Scott nor Grant ever publicly addressed the nature of their relationship, it's clear from the accounts of those who knew them that their bond was unique, personal, and deeply meaningful. Several close friends of the actors as well as those who worked with them during their careers, have reflected on the closeness the two men shared. Their relationship, marked by mutual respect, admiration, and a shared love for life, was something that went far beyond simple friendship. In many ways, they became each other's confidants and closest companions during the years they lived together. It is important to acknowledge that while many continue to speculate about the true nature of their connection, there is no definitive proof to confirm or deny the rumors. What is clear, however, is that Scott and Grant shared a bond that defied the expectations of the time. It was a relationship rooted in trust, companionship, and perhaps even a mutual understanding of the pressures that came with living in the public eye. Both men, despite the world's assumptions, chose to live privately and quietly, protecting the essence of their bond from the prying eyes of Hollywood and its judgmental gaze. The speculation surrounding Scott and Grant also speaks to the broader issues of identity and freedom within the entertainment industry during that period. Hollywood's strict enforcement of gender roles and its rigid expectations of how stars should behave meant that any deviation was met with suspicion and hostility. For Scott and Grant, the public's fascination with their friendship was just another layer of complexity added to their already difficult lives. They were, in many ways, trapped by the very success that made them famous. The pressures of maintaining their public personas, of living up to the expectations of fans, critics, and Hollywood executives created a significant emotional burden, one that both men carried throughout their careers. The true nature of their relationship, however, is something we may never fully know. What we do know is that Scott and Grant were not just colleagues or casual friends. They shared a bond that, for all its mystery and speculation, was a testament to the depth of human connection. Their friendship was a rare and beautiful thing in an industry known for its superficiality, a bond that allowed them both to find solace in a world that often demanded much more than they could give. While the rumors may never be completely put to rest, they serve as a reminder of the complexities that many Hollywood stars of the era faced. Individuals forced to balance their true selves with the roles they played for the public. For Scott and Grant, the unspoken nature of their relationship was perhaps the only way they could maintain a sense of autonomy in an industry that tried to dictate every aspect of their lives. In the end, what we are left with is not scandal, but a deep appreciation for the bond they shared, and a recognition of the quiet struggles they faced as men living in a time when authenticity often came at a steep price. What remains most important is not the speculation, but the legacy that both men left behind in their work. The films, the performances, and the stories they told on screen continue to resonate with audiences today. Their impact on the world of film, especially in the Western genre, is undeniable. And while their personal lives may never be fully understood, the respect and admiration they had for each other remains an enduring part of their story. In 1962, Randolph Scott made the decision to step away from the screen, marking the end of a career that spanned over 3 decades and more than 100 films. His final role, in Ride the High Country, is often regarded as the perfect swan song for his illustrious career. Directed by Sam Peckinpah, Ride the High Country was a film that embodied all the themes Scott had come to represent: honor, sacrifice, and redemption. The film paired him with fellow Western legend Joel McCrea, and their shared performances as aging lawmen looking for one last shot at redemption mirrored Scott's own reflections on his career. It was a fitting end for an actor who had dedicated his life to portraying the strength, resilience, and complexity of the American frontier hero. After his retirement, Scott withdrew from the world of Hollywood, leaving behind the glitz and glamour of the movie industry. Instead of chasing fame, he sought a quieter life in Southern California, far from the public eye that had once been so pervasive in his life. His decision to retire wasn't about turning his back on Hollywood, but rather about finding peace and fulfillment outside of the intense spotlight. In those final years, Scott enjoyed the pleasures of a life well earned. He became an avid golfer, regularly participating in charity tournaments that allowed him to remain involved with the community while also giving back to causes that mattered to him. Scott's life post-Hollywood wasn't marked by the typical trappings of celebrity. He didn't embrace a life of excess or constant social appearances. Instead, he focused on maintaining his personal investments and managing his private affairs, always remaining deeply rooted in his values. He wasn't interested in the headlines or the fame he had worked so hard to attain. What mattered most to him in these later years was his family, his faith, and the contentment that came from enjoying the simpler pleasures of life. He continued to live with the same sense of discipline and stoicism that had defined his career, preferring the privacy of his Beverly Hills home to the chaos of the Hollywood scene. While Scott may have disappeared from public view after retiring, his impact on the film industry, especially in the Western genre, endured long after his final screen appearance. His portrayal of the strong, silent hero, men of principle facing the complexities of the world, resonated with audiences for years. Scott's legacy as one of Hollywood's greatest Western stars is undeniable. He helped shape the genre and redefined what it meant to be a cowboy on screen. His characters were more than just heroic figures. They were men grappling with moral dilemmas, striving to do what was right even when the world around them was uncertain. In a genre often associated with stoic, one-dimensional characters, Scott brought a sense of depth and complexity that set him apart. His westerns were not just about the gunfights and the drama of the frontier. They were about men of conviction, men whose actions spoke louder than words, who navigated the often harsh realities of life with quiet strength. These roles have endured in the hearts of fans, ensuring that Scott's image as the quintessential Western hero is forever cemented. Even after his retirement, Scott remained a symbol of the American Western hero, embodying ideals of honor, rugged individualism, and personal sacrifice. His influence on the genre can still be felt today, as his films continue to inspire filmmakers and actors. While many of his contemporaries saw their careers fade or become overshadowed by scandals and the changing times, Scott's legacy remained unscathed. His contributions to Hollywood and the Western genre have been celebrated by critics, fans, and filmmakers alike, and his films continue to hold a special place in the hearts of movie lovers. Scott's decision to retire quietly and focus on his personal life only added to the mystique surrounding him. He had been one of the most recognized faces in Hollywood for over 30 years. But after Ride the High Country, he chose a life of peace over the constant demands of fame. This move further solidified his reputation as a man of principle, someone who valued his privacy and lived according to a personal code that didn't revolve around the whims of the public. In the years following his retirement, Scott's films remained staples of the Western genre, and his image continued to endure. He became a figure whose legacy wasn't just defined by his films, but by the type of man he was, an actor who embodied strength, quiet dignity, and a sense of honor that transcended the screen. Today, Scott's place in Hollywood history remains secure, and his influence on the Western genre is still felt. His portrayal of the American cowboy, not as a larger-than-life figure, but as a man who fought for what was right in an unforgiving world, remains one of the most enduring and respected images in cinema history. In the end, Randolph Scott's retirement wasn't just a departure from Hollywood. It was a return to the values he had always held dear: family, faith, and a life lived with integrity. Though he stepped away from acting, his legacy as one of the genre's greatest stars will never fade. For those who knew him, for those who watched his films, and for those who continue to discover his work today, Randolph Scott remains a true icon of the American Western. Randolph Scott, the man known for his stoic Western heroes and strong, silent persona, had one final revelation that would shed light on the complexities of his life, a revelation that came long after his death. In 1987, at the age of 89, Scott passed away quietly, leaving behind a legacy of classic Western films and an image of a man defined by strength and honor. But it was in the months following his death that the world discovered a deeply personal note among his belongings. The note, written by Scott himself, would offer a window into the emotional life of a man who had spent most of his years keeping his true self hidden behind the facade of Hollywood's image of masculinity. This handwritten note, though brief, revealed the depth of Randolph Scott's inner world. In it, he expressed feelings of profound loneliness, despite the adoration he received from fans and colleagues alike. For someone who had been so beloved on screen, it was a startling confession. Scott, the rugged cowboy hero, had spent much of his life struggling with the inability to forge deep, authentic relationships. The note laid bare his regrets about the missed opportunities for connection with others, especially the relationships that could have been more genuine had the pressures of fame not kept him isolated. It was a side of Scott that no one had ever seen before, and it left those who read it with a sense of sorrow for a man who had lived with a quiet sadness just beneath his heroic exterior. The note also spoke candidly about the cost of maintaining a public persona. For much of his career, Scott had been known for playing the kind of men who were unshakable, resolute, and always in control. But in the note, he acknowledged that this image had come at a steep price. The persona that had made him famous, the tough, silent cowboy who could weather any storm, had been a defense mechanism, a way to protect himself from the harsh realities of fame and the scrutiny that came with it. The demands of Hollywood's spotlight and the need to maintain a certain image had prevented Scott from living an authentic life. He confessed that the very thing that had made him successful had also kept him from experiencing the deeper emotional connections that so many others seemed to take for granted. Scott's longing for a different life, one in which he could have been more open and vulnerable, was evident in his words. He yearned for a world where he could have been himself, without fear of judgment or the consequences of revealing too much. The note expressed regret over the barriers he had built around himself, walls that had kept people at arm's length. It became clear that Scott had spent a lifetime trying to protect his privacy. But in doing so, he had isolated himself from the very relationships that could have brought him true happiness. The revelations in the note raised more questions than answers. What exactly were the regrets Scott had? What had he missed out on by choosing to live a life so carefully guarded? And perhaps most poignantly, did he ever find the peace he so longed for? Had he reconciled the divide between his public image, the heroic, silent figure of Hollywood, and the private man he had kept hidden from the world? These unanswered questions lingered long after the note was discovered. Did Scott ever feel free from the burden of his fame? Did he come to terms with the fact that he had chosen a path that kept him isolated, even as he was adored by millions? Was the emotional distance he had put between himself and others a choice or a consequence of the environment in which he lived? These are the questions that continue to echo in the wake of the note's discovery. The note provided a glimpse into a part of Scott that no one had ever truly known. A man who, despite being one of the most recognizable faces of his time, was deeply reflective and full of self-doubt. It also gave us a clearer understanding of the emotional toll Hollywood took on its stars during its golden age. The industry, known for its rigid expectations and public scrutiny, created an environment where authenticity was often sacrificed for the sake of maintaining a carefully constructed public image. Scott, like so many others, had played the game, choosing to build a persona that would allow him to survive in an industry that demanded conformity. But the note also offered a sense of closure for those who had known him. It gave them insight into the emotional struggles Scott had carried with him for so long. It also raised awareness of the hidden emotional lives of those who spent their days in front of the camera, playing roles that sometimes bore little resemblance to their true selves. The note served as a powerful reminder that even the most iconic and beloved figures are human, vulnerable, complex, and, at times, deeply conflicted about the paths they have chosen. As we look back on Randolph Scott's life, we see a man who, despite his immense success, was also a man of contradictions. On screen, he portrayed heroes who were steady, reliable, and unflinching in the face of adversity. Off-screen, however, Scott's life was marked by the isolation and emotional challenges of living in a world where fame and privacy were often at odds. The note he left behind gave us a glimpse into the real man behind the cowboy hat and the strong, silent roles. A man who, in the end, was just as human as the characters he portrayed. While the contents of the note brought new insight into Scott's private struggles, it also opened a broader conversation about the cost of fame and the emotional toll it takes on those who live under constant public scrutiny. As we reflect on Scott's life, we can't help but feel a sense of empathy for a man who had everything yet longed for the simple connections he had been unable to forge. The note, in its vulnerability, revealed the complex humanity of one of Hollywood's greatest stars, and reminded us that true strength lies not in perfection, but in the courage to acknowledge our flaws and regrets. For decades, Randolph Scott was viewed by the public as the epitome of the stoic, rugged cowboy, an unflinching hero who embodied the strength, resilience, and independence of the American West. He became the quintessential symbol of masculinity in Hollywood, his characters defined by a quiet resolve and an unwavering sense of duty. He was the man who could ride into town, face down any danger, and emerge victorious without ever uttering more than a few words. To many, Scott's on-screen persona was everything he was: stoic, noble, and almost impossibly strong. He was the cowboy hero that audiences admired and revered, a figure who seemed almost beyond reach. Yet, in the wake of his death, a discovery would shatter that image and offer a new, more intimate understanding of the man behind the myth. The handwritten note, which Scott had left behind, offered a stark contrast to the image he had so carefully cultivated throughout his career. It revealed a side of him that few had ever seen, a man deeply reflective, emotionally vulnerable, and burdened by the weight of his own loneliness. The note humanized Scott in a way that nothing else could. It turned him from an icon of silence and strength into a complex, multi-dimensional individual who had lived with the same fears, regrets, and desires as anyone else. The stoic, silent hero of the Western screen had, in truth, been a man who longed for deeper connections but was never able to fully embrace them. He had struggled with the isolation that came with fame, and this newfound understanding allowed us to see him not as a distant, larger-than-life figure, but as a man wrestling with his own inner conflicts. In revealing this more vulnerable side of Scott, the note added layers of emotional depth to the roles he had played. Scott's Western characters were often defined by their internal struggles, their ability to keep personal pain hidden beneath a calm exterior. With the note, we could see the parallel between his on-screen persona and his off-screen life. the quiet man, struggling to balance his public identity with his private emotions. The note gave new meaning to the characters he had portrayed, especially those who, like Scott himself, had fought for honor and redemption in a world that offered little room for emotional expression. What was once a stoic, larger-than-life figure now appeared as a man seeking peace, understanding, and connection in a world that often denied him those very things. The discovery of the note also brought closure to those who had been closest to Scott, his family, friends, and colleagues. For those who had known him, the note provided a deeper understanding of the man they had shared their lives with. For his family, particularly his wife Pat, and their children, the note revealed emotions that had been hidden behind Scott's quiet demeanor. It allowed them to reconcile the public image of their father and husband with the private man they had known, giving them a sense of peace and understanding that had eluded them before. It answered some of the questions that had lingered for years, questions about his personal struggles and the emotional burdens he carried. For his fans, the note allowed them to connect with Scott in a way they never had before. The stoic cowboy that had always been a distant figure on screen was now a man with a heart and soul that could be felt, even through the pages of a handwritten letter. Fans who had admired him for his heroic portrayals now had a deeper appreciation for the man behind the roles. They understood that Scott, like so many of the characters he played, had been shaped by the same struggles and vulnerabilities that we all face in life. His journey, both on screen and off, had been one of quiet strength, but also of quiet longing, a desire to live more openly, more honestly, but constrained by the realities of fame and societal expectations. The impact of this revelation is profound, not just for those who knew him or admired his work, but for all of us who wrestle with the pressures of living up to an idealized image. The note that Scott left behind is a powerful reminder of the importance of authenticity. It is a call to embrace our true selves, even in a world that often values surface appearances over inner truth. Scott spent much of his life maintaining an image of the unflappable Western hero, but in the end, it was his willingness to confess his loneliness and regrets that revealed the true depth of his character. This vulnerability, which had been hidden beneath the tough exterior of the cowboy roles, allowed him to become more than just a movie star. It allowed him to become an example of the strength it takes to confront one's own truth. The note that Scott left behind changes how we view him, not just as an actor, but as a man. It shows us that true strength doesn't come from silence or stoicism alone, but from the courage to face our own imperfections, to acknowledge our fears, and to seek connection in a world that often seems to keep us at arm's length. Randolph Scott's legacy as a Hollywood icon will forever endure, but it is this final revelation, the note, that humanizes him in a way that makes him even more enduring. His story, both on screen and off, teaches us that the greatest heroes are those who are not afraid to show their vulnerabilities, who live with authenticity, and who, even in their deepest moments of solitude, continue to seek the truth of who they truly are. Randolph Scott's legacy is not one confined to the screen. His impact transcends the roles he played, the heroes he portrayed, and the rugged landscapes he galloped across. It is a legacy that is anchored in the depth of his character, the layers of vulnerability and emotion that he kept hidden for so long. While Scott's on-screen presence made him a symbol of strength and stoic masculinity, it is his final confession, the note he left behind, that truly reveals the man behind the myth. In that note, he shared a side of himself that many never saw, a man filled with quiet longing, self-reflection, and the emotional complexity that comes with being human. His confession altered the way we understand not just the roles he played, but the emotional toll of fame and the toll it took on his personal life. Randolph Scott was more than just the cowboy hero who inspired generations of moviegoers. He was a man who, in the privacy of his final moments, shared his most intimate regrets and desires. And through that admission, he became, in many ways, even more human than ever before. The image of the strong, silent cowboy now stands alongside a more profound truth: that behind every icon, behind every hero, there is a real person, navigating the complexities of life with the same struggles, fears, and dreams that we all face. Scott's final confession strips away the layers of his carefully constructed public persona and offers us a glimpse into a man who, like all of us, sought connection, understanding, and peace. In the years following his passing, the films that made Randolph Scott a star continue to live on, inspiring new generations and capturing the essence of a time and place in American history. But it is through this final revelation, this intimate window into his true self, that we come to appreciate him not just for the roles he played, but for the life he led beyond the silver screen. As we reflect on Randolph Scott's life and work, we are reminded that it is not the facade of perfection that makes a person truly remarkable, but the courage to embrace their vulnerabilities. Scott's films will forever immortalize him as one of Hollywood's greatest Western icons, but it is the humanity revealed in his last words that ultimately defines his legacy. Randolph Scott, the man, is now even more enduring than the rugged cowboy hero who once ruled the Western genre. His final note, his confession of the emotional struggles he faced, and his quiet strength in confronting his own regrets, gives us a fuller picture of the person he was. It is a reminder that even the strongest among us have their moments of doubt,